My friend set me up on a date as a joke. The woman was older, 14 years older, and every single person at that table was waiting for me to be uncomfortable. They were waiting for the awkward laugh, the polite escape, the reaction that would make the whole setup worth their entertainment. But here's what none of them were ready for. I was not uncomfortable, not even close. My name is Jake Mercer. I'm 29 years old. I design buildings for a living, structures built to hold weight that most people never see and never think about until something breaks. My friends thought they knew exactly what kind of man I was. They thought they knew my type, my limits, my reaction. They had planned the whole evening around it. But the older woman sitting beside me that night was not what they imagined when they planned their joke. She was sharp, composed, and quietly remarkable in a way that made everyone else at that table feel suddenly uncomfortably ordinary. And the moment one of my friends opened his mouth to make her the punchline, that was the moment nobody at that table saw coming. The restaurant was called Elevate, a rooftop place downtown, 14 stories above the street, the kind of place where the wind carried perfume and city noise in equal measure. Ryan Caldwell, my best friend since college, had invited me to his 30th birthday dinner. Small group, he had said. Casual, nothing weird. I should have heard the warning in those 3 words. Nothing good has ever followed the phrase, nothing weird. When I stepped out of the elevator, the table was already full. 10 people, 5 couples, 1 empty chair. Ryan saw me first and his face did something strange. Too excited, too eager, like a kid who had hidden something in your closet and could not wait for you to open the door. "Jake," he said, grabbing my shoulder. "There he is, come on." He steered me past the railing, past the candles, past Stephanie, his wife, who was suddenly very interested in her wine glass. The empty seat was at the far end of the table, and in the chair beside it sat a woman I had never seen before. She was looking out at the skyline when I approached. Burgundy dress, dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands falling near her jaw, one hand resting around the stem of a glass like she had forgotten it was there. She did not look nervous. She did not look excited. She looked like someone who had been quietly studying the table for an hour and already understood every person at it. "Jake," Ryan announced with theatrical brightness, "this is Diane Calloway. Diane, Jake Mercer." Diane turned, and the entire table leaned forward an inch. I felt it before I saw it, that small electric shift in a room when people think they are about to watch something. The held breaths, the suppressed smiles. Ryan's friend Marcus at the far end, leaning back in his chair like he had bought a ticket to a show. Diane saw it too. I could tell by the stillness in her shoulders, the way her hand did not move from the glass. She had walked into this room knowing exactly what it was. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I said. The table waited. I pulled out the chair and sat down. Whatever reaction Ryan had been waiting for did not arrive. I saw the small deflation in his face, the recalibration. I ignored it and picked up the menu. Diane glanced at me. Just once. Then, in a voice low enough for only me to hear, she said, "You already know what this is." I figured it out around the third over-enthusiastic greeting. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something better, something that said she had not expected me to be honest with her this fast. "I was told it was a birthday dinner," she said. "Same. So we were both misled." "Apparently." I set the menu down. "Are you angry?" She considered the question with the kind of care most people do not give to anything anymore. "Not angry," she said finally. "Just tired of being the joke in rooms where I came to have dinner." That sentence landed somewhere in my chest I had not been prepared to feel. I looked at her properly then, at the small lines near her eyes that the candlelight could not hide and was not trying to, at the way she held herself, not braced, not defensive, just done pretending the world was kind when it had decided otherwise, and I made a quiet decision. "Then let's not give them the show they paid for," I said. Her eyes lifted to mine, surprised, searching. "Deal," she whispered. Across the table, Marcus took a long sip of his drink and grinned like a man who did not yet know his evening was about to fall apart. He set the glass down, leaned forward, and opened his mouth to speak. What he said next was the sentence that broke the room. Marcus delivered his line the way comedians deliver setups when they think they have nailed the rhythm. "So, Diane," he said, leaning forward with a slow grin. "Real question. When Ryan called you about tonight, did he mention Jake's age, or was the surprise part of the package?" The table went absolutely still. Stephanie set her glass down too carefully. Ryan's smile froze in the exact shape it had been wearing 2 seconds earlier. Even the wind on the rooftop seemed to stop, like the city itself wanted to hear what happened next. Diane did not move. She did not look at Marcus. She did not look at me. She simply took one slow breath, the kind of breath people take when they have learned over many years how to absorb impact in places no one can see. Something rose in my chest that was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something older and quieter. The same thing I feel when I look at a structural plan and spot a flaw nobody else has noticed. I set my fork down. "Marcus," he looked at me, still smiling. "You don't get to ask her that." His smile slipped half an inch. I kept my voice low. "Even the way you speak to a child you do not want to startle. She came tonight because Stephanie invited her, not for entertainment, not for content, not so you could practice the joke you have clearly been rehearsing since Tuesday." "Jake, come on, relax." "I'm relaxed." I held his eyes. "What you are looking at is what relaxed looks like when I'm about to be very honest with you." Nobody at the table breathed. I turned slightly so my voice reached all of them. "You invited a woman here as a punchline. You sat her next to me thinking I would be embarrassed enough to make this funny for you. You watched her walk to that chair knowing exactly what you had planned." I looked at Stephanie. She looked at her plate. And the thing is, she walked in anyway, knowing, because that is what dignity looks like. And it seems like none of you packed any tonight. Then back to Marcus. "So no, you do not get to ask her that. You do not get to ask her anything. The next thing out of your mouth at this table had better be food-related, or I will personally make sure you remember this night for very different reasons." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, picked up his bread roll. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind of silence that presses down on your shoulders, the kind that tells you something has just been rearranged in the room and nobody knows yet how to put it back. Beside me, Diane finally moved. She reached for her water glass, took a small sip, set it down with a hand that was not quite steady, the first crack in her composure I had seen all night. Then, without looking up, she said quietly, "Thank you, Jake." "You don't have to thank me for that." "No," she said, softer now. "I do, because I came here tonight ready to be polite about it. And I'm very tired of being polite about it." She lifted her eyes to mine. And what I saw in them was not gratitude. It was heavier than that. Recognition. The look of someone who had spent a long time being underestimated and had just been seen for the first time in a very long while. That look did something to me I was not prepared for. I picked up my menu again, not because I cared about food, but because I needed somewhere to put the feeling that had just landed in my chest. After a moment, she leaned a little closer. "Jake." "Yeah." "Did you mean it? All of it?" "Every word." She held my gaze for 1 full second longer than was comfortable. Then she turned to her menu. The rest of the dinner happened around us in fragments. People talked too loudly about nothing. Stephanie tried twice to start a normal conversation and failed both times. Marcus did not speak again the entire evening. Diane and I talked quietly between courses, not about the table, not about Marcus, about other things. She told me she was an executive editor at a publishing house called Northgate Press, that she had moved to the city 11 years ago from a small town nobody had heard of, that she had been widowed 3.5 years earlier, and was only now starting to say yes to dinners when friends asked. That last sentence she said almost as an afterthought, but I heard the weight underneath it. When the check came, she reached for her purse. I covered her hand gently with mine. "You did not sign up for this dinner," I said. "You are not paying for it." She looked at me. "Jake," she whispered, "can I ask you something honestly?" "Yes." "Why didn't you laugh?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Because I have spent my whole career building things that hold weight," I said, "and I can tell the difference between something that is strong and something that is only pretending to be." She did not answer. but she did not move her hand either. And as the table around us slowly emptied, couples standing, jackets collected, Ryan avoiding my eyes, I realized something I had not seen coming when I stepped out of that elevator 3 hours earlier. The night was not ending. It was just beginning. The parking garage was nearly empty when we stepped out of the elevator. Our footsteps echoed against concrete, and the smell of rain drifted in from the open ramp. Diane walked beside me without speaking, the kind of silence two people share when something between them is still being decided. She stopped at a silver sedan parked under a flickering bulb. "This is me," she said. I stood across from her, hands in my pockets, not because I was cold, but because I did not yet know what to do with them. She looked up at me. The light caught the silver at her temples, the small lines around her eyes, the faint shadow of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had only set it down a few minutes ago. "Jake, you are 29 years old. I am aware. I'm 43. I'm also aware of that. Then you have to be aware of what tonight looks like to the rest of the world." "I am." She took a slow breath. "I have been married before, Jake. I buried someone I loved very much. I built a life on the other side of that. I'm not looking for a project. I'm not looking to be rescued. And I do not want to be anyone's surprising chapter. I am not offering any of that." "Then what are you offering?" I thought about that question for a long moment. "A real conversation," I said. "Tomorrow, sober, in daylight, where nobody at any table is watching." Her eyes filled, not enough for tears, just enough that I knew the sentence had reached the part of her she did not usually let anyone near. "That's a dangerous offer, Jake." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being careful." I stepped a little closer. Not enough to crowd her, just enough that she would know I was not going anywhere. "Then stop being careful. Just for tomorrow. Just for coffee." She looked at me for a long moment. The garage light flickered. Somewhere far off, a car door closed. "Saturday," she said. 11. There's a cafe near my apartment called Wren. If you are late, I am leaving." "I will not be late." She opened her door, paused. "Jake?" "Yeah." "Whatever this is, please do not waste it being polite." Then she got in the car and drove away. I stood in that parking garage long after her taillights disappeared. The rain started somewhere above the ramp, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the precise structural weight of a moment I did not want to let collapse. Saturday came. I was not late. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and rain. Diane was already there, in a soft gray sweater, no makeup, her hair down. She looked younger than she had on the rooftop, and somehow more herself. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her husband. His name was Daniel. He had been a high school history teacher. He had died of an aneurysm at 41, in their kitchen, on a Wednesday while making tea. She told me about the year after, when she had stopped cooking. The year after that, when she had started reading manuscripts at midnight, just to feel useful. The 3rd year, the one she was in now, when friends had finally started asking her to dinner, and she had finally started saying yes. I told her about Cassidy, about the 2 years I had spent confusing chaos for chemistry, about my father, who had died when I was 19, and how I had become an architect because I wanted to build things that did not fall apart the way he did. We did not run out of things to say. We ran out of cafe. The next date was a walk along the river. The one after that, dinner at a tiny Greek place near her apartment. The one after that, she invited me upstairs for tea, and I stayed until the windows turned silver with morning light. Nothing happened that night except us falling asleep on her couch with our hands not quite touching. But I remember thinking, as I watched her breathing in the dark, that I had never felt more at home in another person's life. My friends did not all come around at the same time. Ryan apologized first, properly, in person. He sat across from me in a coffee shop and said the words, "I was cruel, and I was a coward, and I'm ashamed of who I was that night." I respected him for that. I told him so. I told him it would take time. He understood. Stephanie wrote Diane a handwritten letter. Diane kept it, but did not reply for a long time. When she finally did, all she wrote back was, "Accepted, not erased." Stephanie cried for an hour. Marcus never apologized. He stopped being invited to things. The world has a way of sorting itself out when you stop laughing at the wrong jokes. My mother met Diane on a Sunday afternoon at her house, 6 months in. She had been nervous about the 14 years, about the widowhood, about whether her son was about to make a decision she would have to quietly grieve. By the end of that lunch, my mother was holding Diane's hand across the table, while Diane told her a story about Daniel that made them both laugh and cry at the same time. When I drove Diane home that evening, my mother called me and said only one sentence. "She is the best thing that has happened to you, Jacob. Do not let your pride ruin it." I did not. A year and a half after that rooftop dinner, I finished designing a small library annex for the public school system. A real building. Brick, a glass, sunlight pouring through clear-story windows onto reading benches. The day it opened, I asked Diane to walk through it with me. We stopped at the back corner where I had quietly placed a small brass plaque beneath the window. It read, "For Daniel Calloway, teacher, who taught us that the right book in the right hands can hold a whole life together." Diane read the plaque twice. Then she put her hand against the glass and cried the kind of cry I had never seen her cry. Not the controlled tears of the rooftop, not the careful tears of the cafe, the whole body kind. The kind a person only cries when they finally feel safe enough to. When she turned around, I was already on one knee. "Diane Calloway," I said, "I did not defend you that night because I wanted to be a hero. I defended you because I had finally met a person worth being decent for. I do not want to be the man who stood up for you once at a dinner. I want to be the man who chooses you every ordinary morning after it." She did not say yes right away. She walked over, knelt down in front of me on the polished concrete floor, put both her hands on my face, and whispered, "On purpose, for the rest of our lives, yes." We were married the following spring in her small hometown under an oak tree her grandfather had planted 70 years earlier. 42 people came. My mother gave Diane the necklace her own mother had given her on her wedding day. Ryan was my best man. He cried more than I did. That was 3 years ago. Last month, Diane and I closed on a house with a yard big enough for a vegetable garden and a reading bench under a maple tree. She is teaching me how to grow tomatoes. I'm teaching her how to read a structural blueprint. Neither of us is very good at the lessons yet. Both of us are very good at the laughter that fills the kitchen while we try. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, when the light comes in through the window the way it did that very first night in her apartment, I look across the table at her and remember the rooftop, the candles, the watching faces, the cruel little joke that was supposed to humiliate her, and instead handed me the most important night of my entire life. People still ask us how we met. Diane always smiles and says, "His friends set us up as a joke," and I always add, "Best mistake they ever made." So here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Have you ever been in a room where someone was about to be made into a joke, and you had a choice between laughing along or standing up? Or maybe, and this is the harder question, have you ever been that person? The one at the end of the table everyone was waiting to humiliate? The one praying, just once in your life, that somebody at that table would choose you over the room? Because the world has more Marcuses in it than it should, but it also has more Jakes than people think, and it only takes one of them, at one table, on one ordinary evening, to change a life forever. Tell me your story in the comments, the room you sat in, the voice you wish someone had used, the moment you wish had gone differently, or the one that finally did. And if this story moved you tonight, do me a small favor before you go. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so the next story finds you the moment it drops. Because there are more nights like Jake's coming, more women like Diane, and maybe, just maybe, the next person who refuses to laugh along is you.